I mean, I was surprised when you went to America with this book, because I thought, what's in America? You know, and because of all of the assumptions I had made and what I had been taught as a kid, the narrative was simple. As little as I knew that there was nothing else there
Exactly.
to talk
This was
about.
the view, and this is why America is so interesting, because what we have in the Americas, North and South America, is a gigantic landmass, enormously rich in resources, just the kind of place where a civilization could emerge. And then you take the Ice Age and you recognize that for very long periods the Americas were cut off from the rest of the world, but yet incredibly rich in resources. So now we know that there were human beings there from 130,000 years ago, and we know that archaeologists haven't been looking at what they were doing. Now's the time to ask, what were they doing? What was going on in the Americas in that time? And again, a need for archaeologists to be more humble. How much have they really looked at? Take the Mississippi Valley civilization, which plays an important role in this book. The famous sites are sites like Cahokia or Poverty Point, or the Ohio sites such as High Bank and Newark. Amazing, huge geometrical earthworks, absolutely stunning. But the trouble is that in the 18th and 19th and 20th centuries, there was massive, large-scale destruction of these ancient monuments. They were not considered to be worth preserving. The needs of agriculture and industry were more important. So what we can say is that round about 90% of the monuments that were in the Mississippi Valley in, say, 1700 are gone now. They're not there. So archaeologists, in drawing their conclusions about that culture, are drawing it on a tiny fraction that's randomly left by chance from the mass-scale wipeout that was caused. And then when the archaeologists come to it with preconceived ideas about what sort of culture it should be, that's another form of censorship that imposes itself upon the past. We should let the past speak for itself.
And was that just human destruction without people thinking about it? Why were they
Well,
destroyed?
I mean, first of all, there was the view. You know, things have changed. We live in a different world today. But America in the 18th and 19th centuries was in an aggressively expansionist, expanding westward, and that involved taking the land of the indigenous inhabitants. Right. Well, if you're going to take away, tens of millions of acres from people and stuff them somewhere else, then you need a good excuse to do so. So what you do is you depict them as savages, and you say that actually we're doing them a favor. There's a quote I put in the book concerning the horrific project called the boarding schools project in America, where Native American children, about 90% of them, were physically removed from their families and stuck in boarding schools in another state, far away, punished if they wore any traditional clothing, given the whole ideology of Western civilization, and encouraged to cut themselves off from their roots. Well, no wonder we're a species with amnesia if we take the entire cultural memory banks of the indigenous inhabitants of the Americas and deliberately wipe them out.
Yeah. And so what are some of the things that we're going to learn from reading this book? What are some of the new insights about both North and South America that we might have just previously assumed what I did? There's not much happening there, not much we can learn.
Yes. Well, there's a whole range of things, actually. The first and most important issue to understand, and I've really done a great deal of work on this, is that North America was at the epicenter of a humongous global cataclysm. And it was particularly bad because it was a comet. The evidence is really compelling on this. Now, there are people who are proposing alternatives. One thing nobody disagrees on anymore is that there was a cataclysm 12,800 years ago. The best case, as far as I'm concerned, is the comet case, and we have a group of more than 60 leading scientists who are making that case very, very strongly in the pages of all the mainstream journals. But we have to consider the nature of that cataclysm. It was very, very odd. At that time, North America had been, and the world actually, had been emerging from the Ice Age for several thousand years. the world had been getting warmer. The ice sheets had been getting shallower. If they were, let's say, 2 miles deep at 21,000 years ago, they were about a mile deep or less by 12,800 years ago. So the world was warming up. And then something radical happens. You get a massive deep freeze that descends on the planet. So the planet goes back into the coldest of the Ice Age, suddenly, literally overnight. And you get at the same time this massive die-off of animal species. And very weirdly, you get a rise in sea level. Now, normally, in an episode of freezing, you would not expect the sea level to rise. What you'd expect that extra water to do is to reform as ice on the existing continental ice caps, but it doesn't. You get a sudden spike, a very rapid spike in sea level right at the beginning of this event. That's very, very puzzling. But what can explain it perfectly, is the impact of several fragments of a disintegrated comet with the North American ice cap. The heat and the shock generated by those impacts releases enormous floods of meltwater, which go where? They pour primarily into the Atlantic Ocean, and there they stop the Gulf Stream in its tracks. The Gulf Stream is part of the central heating system of our planet. It keeps the planet warm. It's part of a global meridional oceanic circulation that goes on, taking warm water from the tropics, bringing it up to the north, putting it down, bringing it round again. It stopped completely for about 1,200 years at the beginning of this episode. And that was caused by that release of meltwater, which is measured in the sea level rise that we see at that time. Recently, just recently, there's been news of the discovery of a very large crater in Greenland, actually 32 kilometers wide. It's been discovered with remote sensing.
I read about that.
And actually, a lot of the evidence for the cataclysmic event that took place 12,800 years ago does come from Greenland. Why? Because they have had permanent ice cover in Greenland for hundreds of thousands of years, right through to today. So they're able to put down big tubular drills deep into the ice and bring up a core which has different chemical elements at different levels. And from that, they can tell what the climate was in the world at that time. And more than that, they can tell, for example, were wildfires burning? Was there a huge amount of, they call it biomass burning going on? That leaves specific chemical signatures in those ice cores in Greenland. The biomass is not burning in Greenland, it's actually burning in North America. But it's carried by the winds, the smoke and the soot are carried by the winds to Greenland and show up there. So we have this discovery of a very large crater in Greenland. We've already had from the ice cores evidence that are called impact proxies. For example, platinum, iridium, melt glass, nanodiamonds. They're caused by the heat and shock of an impact. But now we have a 32-kilometer wide crater in Greenland. The scientists who are working on this regard this as a global event. There's evidence of impacts as far south as Antarctica, as far north as Greenland, as far east as Syria, and right the way across the Pacific Ocean as well. It's a global cataclysm, but the heart of it was North America, and the North American ice cap, the Laurentide and the Cordilleran ice caps were joined to the Greenland ice cap. They were all one thing. So this is, to my mind, is likely to prove to be further evidence of the cosmic nature of this cataclysm that occurred 12,800 years ago. And it's on a scale that, were it to repeat in our world today, which actually is not impossible because the remnants of the original giant comet are still in orbit, and they form a known meteor stream called the Taurid meteor stream, through which we pass twice a year. If we were to have another event like the event that happened 12,800 years ago, I can say with absolute confidence that our civilization would not survive it. It would not survive it. All these great buildings, all this amazing machinery, all this tech, none of it would stand us in good stead. We would be gone as a civilization. It would become a punctuation mark in the human story. And when I look at that scenario, bearing in mind that we do pass through the Taurid meteor stream twice
a year.
every year, for 12 days in June and for 12 days in November. We pass through it. When I look at that situation, I ask myself, who in the planet today would survive a disaster on that scale? What kind of people would survive it? And I know it wouldn't be me. I know it wouldn't be the majority of urbanites, or indeed scientists, or any of the creations of the modern world. The people who are really fit for survival in a world in turmoil are the hunter-gatherers. They're the meek of the earth, you know, in Namibia, in the Amazon jungle. People whose daily business is survival. They would hardly be knocked sideways by this event. They would just take it in their stride and they would carry on. They would not suffer the psychological damage. Can you imagine the psychological damage of billions of people who are used to living in the comfort of cities with every necessity laid on for them every day without any difficulty in acquiring it? Suddenly all that stops. Can you imagine the effect of that on the educated Western mind? It would be extremely bad. But the hunter-gatherers would survive. I think that actually was the case 12,800 years ago as well.
Really?
I think it was the hunter-gatherers who survived and passed on the message. So one part of it is and I've tried to really bring this home, how central America was to this cataclysmic event that took place across the whole world, and then consider what did that obliterate? What did that event obliterate? What did it wipe out from the human story?